Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Natalia Ortega, and this presentation is for Pharmacy 564, Psychedelic History, Sacred Plants, Science, and Psychotherapy. Today I will be presenting my project titled Bridging Generations, Indigenous Healing, Epigenetics, and Birth Outcomes. In this presentation, I will explore the potential of integrating indigenous approaches to healing intergenerational trauma with insights from the field of epigenetics. My aim is to investigate how this synthesis can inform strategies to address the persistent and critical issue of maternal-infant health disparities within the United States. Specifically, I will connect historical context, cultural practices, and biological mechanisms drawing from various sources to propose a more holistic understanding of the factors contributing to these disparities and to explore potential solutions rooted in the wisdom of indigenous traditions and contemporary science. The stark reality of maternal and infant health disparities in the United States demands immediate attention. Low birth weight, a critical indicator of overall community health, leads to increased morbidity and mortality, particularly within the first year of life, and is associated with long-term negative health consequences such as hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes. Persistent disparities in maternal and infant health outcomes within marginalized U.S. communities, particularly among African American women, defy traditional medical explanations. As visualized here in Figure 2 from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention's National Center for Health Statistics. In 2023, the maternal mortality rate was 18.6 deaths per 100,000 live births, indicating a serious public health issue. This crisis is not experienced equally across all populations. Figure 2 highlights the reality for racial and ethnic disparities in both maternal and infant health outcomes. The CDC data shows that in 2023, the maternal mortality rate for Black women was alarmingly high at 50.3 deaths per 100,000 live births, compared to 14.5 for white women. This disproportionate impact extends to infant health as well. Research highlights that these poor national trends mask alarming variability in the rates of infant and maternal morbidity and mortality by race and ethnicity, with non-Hispanic Black Americans and American Indian Alaska Natives carrying an excessive burden of morbidity and mortality relative to other racial groups. These disparities are not simply a result of individual choices or biological differences. A growing body of evidence points to the fundamental role of systemic racism and historical trauma as root causes. As my outline states, historical trauma plays a significant role in the current health of marginalized communities. Research emphasizes that the social and economic conditions shaped by racism contributes to these poor outcomes. Furthermore, studies propose that the low birth weight observed in contemporary African Americans may be linked to the conditions experienced during slavery, suggesting an intergenerational impact of historical trauma. Now that we have established the urgent need to address maternal and infant health disparities, particularly within marginalized communities, let's turn our attention to the focus on this project. My research aims to explore a promising avenue for developing more effective interventions, the integration of indigenous healing practices within our contemporary understanding of epigenetics. The central goal of this project, as outlined in my proposal, is to investigate how the knowledge and practices held within indigenous traditions for healing intergenerational trauma can be combined with insights from epigenetics to inform the development of therapies aimed at improving maternal and child health outcomes in these underserved communities. The key premise underpinning this exploration is that indigenous practices developed over generations offer profound and valuable knowledge regarding the impact of healing of trauma that spans generations. Many of the principles and approaches within these indigenous healing systems appear to mirror contemporary discussions and scientific understanding emerging from the field of epigenetics, particularly concerning the inheritance of environmental influences on gene expression. This potential alignment suggests a rich ground for synergistic learning and the development of innovative and culturally sensitive approaches to care. Despite the history of disruption, the enduring wisdom within indigenous traditions offers valuable insights. The first one is the indigenous approaches to trauma healing. Historically, indigenous cultures developed intricate ways of understanding and treating the effects of trauma. affecting both individuals and the community as a whole. These approaches often connect to the spiritual, emotional, and physical aspects of well-being. It's important to acknowledge that some indigenous traditions have long incorporated the ceremonial use of sacred plants to aid healing and foster significant personal and communal change. These ceremonies are conducted with deep respect and intention, and it is crucial to recognize that they are not to be appropriated. Community-centered birthing traditions. Beyond healing trauma, indigenous communities also develop unique approaches to childbirth. Resources like Hayward and Sidrow's Indigenous Birth as a Ceremony and a Human Right detail historical birthing practices, emphasizing the critical role of community. In many indigenous cultures, pregnant women held a prioritized position, seen as carrying the spirit, and the community actively invested in the mother's well-being. This community-centered approach, where pregnancy and birth were a collective responsibility, extended beyond prenatal care to include emotional and spiritual support. As highlighted in this literature, which includes primary source material, traditional midwives hold a significant role, even having a special name in the Mohawk language. This name meaning she is pulling the baby out of the earth. Furthermore, Rachel Olson, cited in Hayward and Sidrow's, details the water ceremony, emphasizing the deep connection between birthplace and landscapes, with pregnancy being perceived as carrying sacred water, a powerful metaphor for the amniotic fluid in the onset of labor. This historical perspective provides a critical counterpoint to modern Western birthing practices, which often lack the same level of community and cultural support. Prioritizing the mother's well-being and state of mind during pregnancy was crucial across indigenous communities, recognizing the holistic needs for healthy birth outcomes. This literature also advocates for the revitalization of these traditions in modern indigenous communities who face similar maternal and child health disparities as African American women in the U.S. do. The last one is the impact of colonization. It is vital to remember that the historical oppression and systemic injustices faced by indigenous communities, including colonization, forced removal, and cultural suppression, having had profound and lasting impacts on their health and well-being, contributing to significant health disparities that persist today. Understanding the historical context of trauma within the indigenous communities provides a critical lens through which we can also examine the intergenerational health impacts experienced by both marginalized groups in the U.S., such as African American women, whose history includes the trauma of slavery and ongoing systemic racism. Recognizing these parallel histories of oppression and their enduring biological and social consequences is essential for developing holistic and effective solutions to the maternal and child health crisis affecting these communities. This slide presents critical data on infant mortality disparities in the United States drawn from the National Vital Statistics System. The graph clearly illustrates the disproportionately high infant mortality rates among American Indian/Alaska Native and Black women compared to white women. It's a common but insufficient explanation to attribute these disparities solely to socioeconomic factors like lack of education, limited access to health care, or career instability. For the rest of the slide, I will be quoting and using a lot of what was said in Miriam Perez's TED Talk, where she powerfully illuminates this reality. So to begin, to emphasize with this point, I'll just consider Perez's direct words. If we take a look at the statistics about the rates of illness during pregnancy and childbirth, we see clearly the pattern outlined by Dr. Williams. African American women in particular have an entirely different experience than white women when it comes to whether their babies are born healthy. Perez further drives home the severity of the disparity in certain parts of the country, particularly the Deep South. The rates of mother and infant death for Black women actually approximate those rates in sub-Saharan Africa. In those same communities, the rates for white women are near zero. This contrast challenges the idea that socioeconomic factors are the sole cause. Even nationally, Black women are 4 times more likely to die during pregnancy and childbirth than white women. They're also twice as likely for their infants to die before the first year of life than white infants, and 2 to 3 times more likely to give birth too early or too skinny, a sign of insufficient development. Native women are also more likely to have the higher rates of these problems than white women, as are some groups of Latinas. Perez also addresses a common dismissal of these statistics when people say things like, oh, it must be due to the assumption of poverty or lack of access to care. But it turns out that neither of these things tell the whole story. And even middle-class Black women with the same degree, the same income annually, the same access to health care still have much worse outcomes than their middle-class white counterparts. The gap actually widens among this group. And while access to care is definitely still a problem, even women of color who receive the recommended prenatal care still suffer from these high rates. The last thing I want to end on that was something super interesting from Perez's discussion was the idea of the immigrant paradox. Basically, she touches on the fact that the impact of racism itself has. We can come back to the path from discrimination to stress to poor health, and it begins to paint a picture that many people of color know to be true. Racism is actually making us sick. Consider this. Immigrants, particularly Black and Latina immigrants, actually have better health when they first arrive in the United States. But the longer they stay in this country, the worse their health becomes. People like me, born in the United States to a Mexican immigrant father, are actually more likely to have worse health than my grandparents did. It's what researchers call the immigrant paradox, and it further illustrates that there's something in the U.S. environment that is making us sick. Considering the historical context of trauma and oppression faced by these communities, a crucial question arises. Could epigenetic mechanisms play a role in the intergenerational transmission of these vulnerabilities, contributing to these stark and persistent disparities in infant mortality? Marian Perez's TED Talk will be included in the literature cited at the end of this presentation, and I highly recommend if you have time to watch it. It's a key area this project will explore, and then again, Marian Perez's TED Talk will be included in the literature cited at the end of this presentation. Having established the persistent and unacceptable disparities in maternal and infant health, and having considered the limitations of purely socioeconomic explanations, we now turn to the science of epigenetics. Epigenetics offers a potential biological mechanism for understanding how the impact environmental factors such as trauma and chronic stress can be transmitted across generations without altering the underlying DNA sequence itself. Think of it this way. While our genes provide the blueprint, epigenetics refers to the modifications that can switch genes on or off or alter their level of expression. These modifications can be influenced by our experience and environment, and importantly, some of these epigenetic changes can be passed down from parents to their children, potentially affecting their health and development. This concept provides a biological framework for understanding the idea of blood memory, or the intergenerational transmission of trauma, a concept that deeply resonates with the lived experiences and traditional understandings within many indigenous cultures. As highlighted in the literature, traditional and indigenous perspectives on healing trauma with psychedelic plant medicines, this blood memory concept, while distinct from the modern scientific term, shares a compelling parallel with contemporary understandings of epigenetics. The article explores the connection between spirituality and science, the challenges indigenous individuals face in psychedelic spaces, and the vital role of spirituality and culture in healing from trauma. It specifically emphasizes how our experience, including the trauma of colonization, can alter gene expression and contribute to the inheritance of trauma, a core concept in epigenetics. While indigenous cultures may not have used the term epigenetics, their holistic views of health and well-being often included the understanding that experience could have long-lasting effects on future generations. This understanding extended to the use of plant medicines for healing. Indigenous medical systems are described as ethical ecosystems, protective and holistic, and interconnecting humans and the environment with a deep reverence for the planet that guides all relationships and a commitment to preserve all life. Many psychedelics are rooted in secret plant medicines used by indigenous peoples for thousands of years, such as ayahuasca, peyote, San Pedro, the psilocybin mushrooms, which possess a unique ability to quickly reconnect us to the metaphysical. For example, many indigenous traditions emphasize the importance of the mother's well-being during pregnancy, recognizing that her physical, emotional, and spiritual state directly influences the health of their child. This aligns with epigenetic research showing that the maternal stress and nutrition during pregnancy can induce epigenetic changes in the developing fetus. The historical traumas of colonization forced displacement, and cultural genocide inflicted upon indigenous communities, as well as the enduring legacy of slavery and systemic racism faced by Black communities, represent profound and chronic stressors that could have induced epigenetic changes across generations. These inherited epigenetic modifications could potentially influence a range of biological processes relevant to maternal and child health outcomes, such as stress response systems, immune function, and susceptibility to inflammation. For example, chronic stress can lead to epigenetic changes that increase inflammation, which is implicated in adverse pregnancy outcomes like preterm birth and low birth weight, outcomes that we see disproportionately in the communities we've been discussing. Therefore, epigenetics offers a compelling avenue for understanding how the historical and ongoing traumas experienced by marginalized communities might biologically contribute to the persistent health disparities we observe today. It provides a scientific basis for exploring the intergenerational impact of social and environmental injustices on health, and as the traditional and indigenous perspectives on healing trauma with psychedelic plant medicine article suggests, it also validates the importance of incorporating cultural and spiritual perspectives, including the use of plant medicine in healing. Okay, that last slide was a lot, but there's so much to discuss when discussing epigenetics. But healing from trauma, especially historical trauma, requires more than just addressing individual biology. It necessitates a holistic approach that incorporates cultural, spiritual, and community dimensions. A key element here is the reconnection to cultural and spiritual practices. As the literature highlights, spirituality and culture play vital roles in healing from trauma. For indigenous communities, this may involve traditional ceremonies, storytelling, and connection to the land. For Black communities, it might include practices rooted in African traditions such as communal rituals, music, and oral history. These practices can serve as a powerful buffer against the ongoing effects of stress and trauma, fostering resilience and a sense of belonging. Furthermore, community support is essential. Epigenetic research suggests that the supportive environments can actually mitigate the negative impacts of stress. Indigenous and Black communities have strong traditions of communal support, and this can be leveraged to create nurturing environments for mothers and children. This could involve extended family networks, community health workers, and culturally tailored support groups that provide emotional, social, and practical assistance. The use of traditional plant medicines also hold potential. However, I would like to say that this presentation is not to push psychedelics onto mothers or pregnancy at all. It's just to guide already existing therapeutic applications and maybe the supplement of plant medicines. The traditional and indigenous perspectives on healing trauma with psychedelic plant medicines discusses the use of psychedelics in indigenous healing practices. While these approaches require careful consideration and ethical guidelines, they offer a unique avenue for addressing traumas by facilitating emotional processing and spiritual connection. It is important to proceed cautiously and respectfully, always prioritizing the knowledge and leadership of indigenous communities. So now I want to highlight a concrete example of maternity care model that embodies many of the principles we discussed for addressing disparities. This is a model that I came across during my undergraduate research. This is called the JJ Way, and it's developed by Jenny Joseph. The JJ Way is a holistic approach to maternity care with a clear mission to tackle the significant health and healthcare disparities that we've seen disproportionately affect Black women and other marginalized communities. Importantly, this model ensures that all women receive comprehensive care regardless of their financial circumstances. The foundation of the JJ Way rests on 4 key cornerstones. As we can see in this slide, access, meaning 100% access to care, ensuring no one is turned away. Connection, fostering strong relationships between the care team, the woman, and her support system. Knowledge, providing culturally responsive education and empowerment, increasing a woman's agency and self-determination through her pregnancy journey. While the JJ Way is not explicitly identified as an indigenous model, I found that its key principles resonate strongly with the values that are often central to indigenous approaches to health and well-being. For example, the emphasis on holistic care in the JJ Way, addressing the woman's social, emotional, and spiritual needs in addition to her physical health, aligns with the interconnected view of health often found in indigenous traditions. The focus on community-based care and connection echoes the importance of strong family and community networks in supporting mothers and children in many Indigenous cultures. The principle of empowerment aligns with the Indigenous value of self-determination and the importance of respecting an individual's autonomy in healthcare decisions. The commitment to cultural sensitivity and trauma-informed care acknowledges the impact of historical and ongoing trauma, a crucial consideration when working with Indigenous communities. Central to its success are its key principles, including a strong commitment to trauma-informed care, recognizing and addressing the impact of past trauma, a community-based and patient-centered approach, tailoring care to the individual's needs and context, and an explicit focus on eliminating the unacceptable disparities we've highlighted thus far in this presentation. The results of the JJ Way are compelling. Evaluations have demonstrated the actual elimination of health disparities in preterm birth rates among the populations they serve. Furthermore, the JJ Way model that was performed in Florida was able to completely eliminate the reduction in the rates of low birth weight babies, where they actually were able to give birth to all healthy weight babies. The JJ Way serves as a powerful illustration of how a holistic, accessible, and community-centered model with a focus on trauma-informed care and cultural sensitivity can achieve remarkable outcomes and align with the core values embedded in many Indigenous approaches to maternal and child health. Really helpful in preparing my presentation here. The JJ Way In conclusion, it is imperative that we address the urgent crisis of maternal and infant health disparities in the United States. As we have seen, these disparities are deeply rooted in historical trauma and ongoing systemic inequalities, disproportionately affecting Black and Indigenous communities. This presentation has argued for the critical value of bridging the wisdom of Indigenous healing practices with the insights of epigenetics. This integrated approach offers a more holistic understanding to the complex factors contributing to these disparities, including the intergenerational transmission of trauma. Models like the JJ Way demonstrate the effectiveness of holistic, community-centered, and culturally sensitive care in reducing and even eliminating these disparities. Its principles align with many of the core values found in approaches to health and well-being. Moving forward, it is crucial that we continue to explore the epigenetic mechanisms through which historical trauma impacts maternal and child health. We learn from and respectfully integrate the holistic healing practices of Indigenous communities and support and scale models like the JJ Way that prioritize access, connection, and knowledge and empowerment through trauma-informed care. By bridging knowledge, honoring cultural wisdom, and implementing evidence-based models, we can strive towards a future where health equity is a reality for all mothers and children in the United States. And here is going to be a list of all the literature I was able to use and so grateful to read and look through to prepare this presentation. So thanks for listening.